On June 28, 2009, the Honduran army kidnapped President Manuel Zelaya and put him on a military flight to Costa Rica, then proceeded to shut down any critical media outlets and targeted journalists, human rights defenders, and political activists with threats and violence. Zelaya, a wealthy Honduran from the centrist Liberal Party, began to move his government to the left, and conditions for the poor of the country improved. He raised the minimum wage, provided free school lunches, pensions for the elderly, built new schools, and subsidized public transportation. Zelaya brought Honduras into the Petro-Carib Agreement, which aims to resolve asymmetries in access to energy resources through new, favorable, equitable, and fair exchange schemes between the countries of the Caribbean region. This allows countries to buy oil from Venezuela and pay it off gradually at only 1% interest. Countries can also opt to pay using goods and services. Cuba pays for oil with medical services, and Nicaragua pays with meat and milk. But what really upset the country's oligarchs and Western powers was talk of a new constitution, a non-binding referendum on whether a constitutional assembly should replace the 1982 constitution that was written during a military dictatorship, was scheduled to take place on the day of the coup. Those in favor of a coup complained that a new constitution would get rid of term limits. This would not have benefited Zelaya, as his term limit would be up before the new constitution was complete. Also upsetting to the oligarchs and foreign corporate interests were the land reforms. Zelaya enacted a decree to grant titles to peasants who had occupied and worked the land for more than 10 years. There is speculation that the military coup had support from the U.S. The Honduran general that led the coup was a graduate of the notorious School of the Americas, which has a number of graduates who have engaged in coups. There were reports that Honduran politicians and businessmen who backed the coup lobbied Congress for support, and the plane that flew Zelaya out of the country stopped to fuel up at a joint U.S.-Honduran airbase. The UN and every other country in the Western Hemisphere condemned the military coup, but both the US and Canada were very quick to recognize the new Honduran government. While Canada made a statement condemning the coup, they maintained military aid to Honduras. The US also condemned the coup, but were quick to recognize the winner of the next presidential election that did not include Zelaya on the ballot. In her book, Hard Choices, Hillary Clinton wrote, "We strategized on a plan to restore order in Honduras and ensure that free and fair elections could be held quickly and legitimately, which would render the question of Zelaya moot. As long as someone favorable to the U.S. was elected, they would call it democracy." Plans to ban open-pit mining and increase environmental regulations in order to prevent cyanide, lead, mercury, and arsenic from contaminating water supplies ended when Zelaya was ousted from office. Since then, environmentalists who challenge the mines do so at their own risk and are routinely killed. Several indigenous activists were killed protesting a hydro dam before investors finally pulled funding and ended the project. Renewable fuel targets in the West have tripled the demand for palm oil, and Honduran agro-oligarchs are cashing in. They use paramilitaries and private guards to terrorize peasants into leaving agricultural collectives that many peasants legally occupied and farmed since the land reforms of the 60s and 70s. The creation of special economic zones in Honduras allows foreign-owned corporations to avoid paying taxes, benefits, or fair wages in order to maximize profits. Canadian clothing company Gildan takes advantage of poverty-stricken workers that are easily exploited and replaced. Workers have accused the company of low wages, no benefits, and suppressing any attempts at forming a union. But at least Canadians don't have to overpay for their t-shirts. Western interference in Honduras is directly responsible for creating the unlivable conditions that cause masses of people to flee north towards the U.S. border. It's hard not to be disgusted by the hypocrisy when the same politicians that destroyed Honduras express sympathy for the migrants. Honduras had general elections in November 2017, and Juan Orlando Hernandez declared himself to be the winner amid widespread allegations of electoral fraud. The term limits that concerned the U.S. when Zelaya was president were overturned by the Supreme Court, allowing Hernandez to run for a second term. The U.S. was quick to accept the election results and recognize Hernandez as president. I guess the West doesn't mind election fraud or overturned term limits if it helps right-wing dictators maintain conditions that are favorable to foreign corporations.